Hello, I'm Brannon Howse, and at WVW Broadcast Network, we take customer service seriously. If you have an issue with your Situation Room membership, you want to renew your Situation Room membership, you want to reset your password, you forgot your password, all you need to do is email or text us. The fastest response is by text. You can text us at 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Now, this is very important. When emailing or texting, you must give us the email address tied to your Situation Room account so we can look up your account for you. So please be sure to give us the email address tied to your Situation Room account so we can look up your account and be ready to help you when you text us at 901-825-0652. You can also email us, housemelissa@icloud.com. That's House, Howse, Melissa @icloud.com. Again, housemelissa@icloud.com. And my wife will get back to you either by email or text, and we'll make sure that you are a satisfied member of the Situation Room. Thank you for being a member of the Situation Room, your conservative Worldview TV channel.
Faith, spiritual values, moral issues, government, economy, education, work, responsibility. What we think about these depends on our worldview. Now, VCY America presents Worldview Weekend Radio with Brannon Howse.
Welcome, glad you're with us. And Diana West joins us today for a great conversation on something that I've been waiting to have come out for a while now. She's been working on it a while. I've known about it. And it's called The Red Thread. The Red Thread. And the subtitle is A Search for Ideological Drivers Inside the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. Let me give you that subtitle again. The title again is The Red Thread. It's a new book by my friend Diana West. And the subtitle is A Search for Ideological Drivers Inside the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. It's put out by the Center for Security Policy Press. And you can find out more at Amazon.com as well as at securefreedom.org. Joining me now is Diana West. Diana, welcome back to the broadcast. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, wonderful to be back with you, Brannon. I'm so glad you're emphasizing that subtitle because it really sums it up.
Well, and indeed it does. And by the way, you guys just did a big launch for this on what, Thursday or Friday of last week?
Friday afternoon, yes.
So we're one of the first interviews probably to get you this morning, aren't we?
You are number one.
Awesome. Well, we
yes.
like to be on the groundbreaking of good interviews here, and this is definitely it. Well, first of all, this is a thick document. I think it's 130 pages or thereabouts, right? 116?
It's a slim 104 pages of text with notes and index, but I actually tried very hard to keep it as streamlined as possible. But if you think of it in terms of breaking news, which a lot of it is sort of long-form journalism. It is a long form of journalism, but in terms of a book, it's actually a pretty slim read.
It is, and the only reason it seems big to me is because I printed it out, as I always do on these kind of things, 8.5 by 11 from my computer, because I like to then put a big black clip on it and mark it up and post note it. And you know, I've said before, when the Center for Security Policy briefing papers come out, for me that's like a Christmas gift, and I get pretty excited because then I get to get my highlighter and my post-it notes and spend a couple hours reading. And this to me is like what I guess to some folks is a football game they like to take part in. This to me is like my sport. This is what I do. This is my hobby right here. This is a very good book. I'm looking forward to reading it. Now, what led you to write it? And what is the connection? I mean, red thread, you must be talking communism. And so am I gathering that you're saying there are communist, cultural Marxist, social justice warriors, the fifth column, deep state behind these ideological drivers that are inside the anti-Trump conspiracy?
Well, this became my quest, actually, to answer that question, beginning with the question why. Why were we seeing, let's take this back a year. I was working on this project for about a year of research on and off as the story broke in terms of what we understand about the anti-Trump conspiracy, the soft coup, things like FISA-gate, the Robert Mueller investigation, all the things that we've been watching take shape ever since Donald Trump certainly came into office, but of course we know it was going on beforehand. And my question was always, this is not what happens in America. When one party is kicked out of office in a clean and legitimate election, which we hold every 2 to 4 years here in Washington and across the country, the other party steps out. People write books, they take jobs, they go on sabbatical, they engage in political activity to come back next time to fight harder at the next election, and that is what we think of when we think of the peaceful transition of power in this country, which is one of our great traditions. Well, everything we've seen since Donald Trump was elected president in 2016 has been like out of a totalitarian nightmare, as we've learned that the FBI and the Justice Department and various aspects of the Obama administration and media involvement and the rest of it, we've seen pieces coming together forming a conspiracy to use the powers of the federal surveillance state against domestic political opposition party, namely the Republican candidate and his team in 2016 and his presidency going forward after his inauguration in 2017. So this is something so foreign to us, and rightly so, and I hope in the future will be foreign to us again, that my question really became a way of saying, what was motivating senior officials in Washington, D.C., people, career officials, people at the top of these departments with vast amounts to lose, whether it was their careers, their pensions, their freedom potentially, in terms of committing so many lawless acts to undermine and overturn an election. And that's the place I started. And I will tell you that the first little red thread that popped up was in December of 2017 when we had a very peculiar story break that told us about this couple, Bruce Orr at the Justice Department and Nellie Orr at Fusion GPS, and what they did in terms of move this conspiracy forward in the creation of the Steele dossier and the weaponization of that inside Justice and FBI. And the red thread was Nellie, because we can't really penetrate these resumes of officials. They have big jobs. There's a list of big jobs. There's a list of law schools and so on. And we look at that and we say, well, looks like a respectable citizen. How do we know who this person really is in their official functions? Well, Nellie was an academic. Nellie taught Russian studies at Vassar in the 1990s. She wrote a PhD thesis. She wrote book reviews. There was a paper trail to pick up on with Nellie Orr, and that is where this whole red thread started, because what I discovered about Nellie Orr, and we can go into it, because it's documented, is Nellie's work essentially formed an apology for a number of what we look back at the crimes of Stalin. So we're looking at a Soviet soft person at the heart of the anti-Trump conspiracy.
All right, let's make sure we got this. Let's make sure we understand. What you're saying is that Nellie Orr, whose husband is Bruce Orr, and he was a top official at the Justice Department, Bruce Orr.
Yes.
And his wife, Nellie, has degrees in Russian studies, and you just said is kind of a soft person toward the former Soviet Union.
Yes. Let me give you an example very quickly. Again, from these book reviews, they're not the most interesting book reviews in the world. They're academic books, and they're written in the reviews are written in academic language. And when I was first reading them, they were a little tough to really digest. But then I would come across kind of these startling phrases, shall we say, where she's reviewing a book about the terror, the Great Terror in the 1930s in Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union. And she is commending the book, which is itself an apologetic for this period, because the book attempts to account for the agonizing paradoxes of the Stalinist state. Now, just think about that for a minute. If it's a paradox, that means that there are two opposites coming together here. So she's talking about the legal structure, which was wonderful, and the torture and execution of innocent civilians. So we've got, on the one hand, she's applauding the legal structure, which, of course, is ridiculous, but let's just say they were building a legal structure, and yet they were also torturing and executing innocent civilians. This is a paradox for Nellie Orr. She talks about, literally, this is another quote, the terror and excitement of the Stalin era. That means that while they were killing millions of people, it was actually a very exciting time as well because of these developments. various developments that she found commendable. And so this becomes a way for me to start examining what it is that she is really trying to applaud here, how she regards this kind of history that most of us look back on and are absolutely horrified and appalled and don't see any redeeming features in this kind of totalitarian terror state. Nellie Orr, who was the Russia expert at Fusion GPS, which is the group that produced the so-called Steele dossier. Nellie Orr is an apologist for Stalin, and that just is, lies on the printed page. And again, I developed this over many pages in this monograph. But this is the kind of thing that allowed me to start looking and understanding who these people are, building out an ideological profile, if you will, of how they think and what would drive them to be so hostile to our constitutional order.
All right, so let's make sure our audience understands, because some folks get it, some maybe don't. We're talking about an organization called Fusion GPS, and they're the ones that supposedly funded or created the fake dossier on Donald Trump. A lot of things about him in hotel rooms that we don't want to describe in Russia that apparently never happened. It's complete phoniness, and it was created by Fusion GPS, and it's connected or was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee,
yes,
which had funneled payments to this group called Fusion GPS via the law firm Perkins Cole. And now you will go on to say that the connection then to Nellie Orr, this radical you're talking about, and her husband Bruce Orr, who's a top official at the Justice Department, what's their connection to Fusion GPS?
Well, Nellie Orr was considered the top Russia expert at Fusion GPS that was essentially crafting this so-called dossier. We don't know all the nuts and bolts about her role there. There are quite a number of questions we need to know. We also know that she, at one time in her life, was an affiliate of the CIA. We know that we don't know the extent of it. Was she a staffer or contractor? We don't know. Does she know John Brannon? We don't know. But we do know for a fact she worked for the CIA as an analyst. And we also know that she took out a ham radio operator's license in 2016 also, which for devotees of the Cold War history or spy movies will recognize as a means of communication. That's very hard to detect even today with everything we have going back to the Cold War. So that's an interesting detail that we have not had really explained. She was married to her, they went to Harvard together back in the 80s. She was married to Bruce Orr, who went on to get a Harvard law degree, while Nellie continued studying Soviet studies at the time. She studied in the Soviet Union, which is another tell in terms of the fact that all the scholars from America who went to the Soviet Union literally had to be under KGB discipline in order to pursue their studies. They had to have their topics approved, and what they saw was carefully restricted and so on. Bruce Orr went on to become, as I understand it, the senior-most career official at the Justice Department. And his role in the Trump conspiracy has to do with being a doorway or conduit of information from Christopher Steele, who had been this former British intelligence officer, retired, who also worked for Fusion, and his wife's information, his wife's research. He was an informal conduit into the Justice Department chain of evidence, which is completely unorthodox, all throughout this period and after the election even. So we still are discovering all of the mechanics of this.
So are you telling me that Bruce Orr was taking info from this phony Steele dossier that Hillary Clinton and GPS and the DNC put together? He's taking information from the Steele dossier and from his wife, who also worked with GPS, and he's using it to build a case against Donald Trump? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I'm telling you partly that. I'm telling that he was taking that information and moving it into the FBI investigation that would lead to surveillance, spying on the whole Trump team, both during the campaign and during the presidency.
So he used it to justify surveilling a presidential candidate and then the president of the United States. And the information is coming from his wife's organization. She works with GPS. and this guy, Steele. Okay, my guest is Diana West, and we come back, we're going to look more at, is there really I don't know the way to say it, a communist conspiracy to bring down Donald Trump? Don't go away.
Mark your calendar now for the 16th annual Ozarks Worldview Weekend at beautiful Lake of the Ozarks. Hello, I'm Brannon Howse. We had a great 15th annual Ozarks Worldview Weekend, and now we're on to the 16th annual Ozarks Worldview Weekend. Friday night, May 3rd, Saturday, May 4th, half-day Sunday, May 5th. As I said, at beautiful Lake of the Ozarks at Tantera Resort. We've got our contracts, and we are off and running with a great lineup already scheduled for 2019. We have Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Messianic Jewish scholar Arnold Fruchtenbaum, whose family escaped from behind the Iron Curtain. Mark Hitchcock is back by popular demand. Ed Heinzen will be a first-time speaker for us at one of our in-person Worldview weekends. David Hawking, Andy Woods, and we have more speakers that we'll be booking very soon and let you know about. But I wanted to let you know about the speakers we already have lined up. I wanted to let you know we are going to go back to the Tantera Resort on beautiful Lake of the Ozarks, May 3rd. That's a Friday night, Saturday, May 4th, half-day Sunday, May 5th, 2019. It's not too early to go ahead and register and join us, and you can do that at wvwtv.com/Ozarks, wvwtv.com/Ozarks. Marty Getz will be joining us, providing music once again. Now again, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Mark Hitchcock, Ed Heinzen, David Hawking, Andy Woods, and more speakers to come. This is just the lineup we've already secured. I think these speakers in itself would be worthy of a weekend, don't you? We are going to book even more speakers, but I wanted to go ahead and let you know the dates, because many of you want to go ahead and mark your calendar and ask off if you have work or make family plans. And don't forget, bring the young kids with you. Beautiful indoor water park, horseback riding, bowling alley, and so much more. Many, many young families this last year. Many young families with young children. I guess they brought family members or babysitters, and they were enjoying the amenities of the resort while the parents and the grandparents took in the conference. So do that again, because it's a family vacation with a purpose. May 3, 4, and 5, 2019. Full details at wvwtv.com/Ozarks.
Welcome back. Glad you're with us. Worldview Radio, our website, worldviewradio.com. We'll post this later tonight at worldviewradio.com, because I think you're going to want to share this with your family or friends. By the way, don't forget about our upcoming 16th annual Ozarks Worldview Weekend at beautiful Tantera Resort, something for the entire family. You can even bring the little kids with you. If you bring a babysitter or a family member to take care of them, they can enjoy the amenities of the resort. Of course, you can too during the free time, but the young ones would have something to do, while the older folks, and by older folks I mean the adults, and then maybe you bring your parents with you. And we saw a lot of that last year, multi-generations joining us for the Ozarks Worldview Weekend. All the details at wvwtv.com/Ozarks, www.tv.com/Ozarks. Our theme this year, Holocaust Horizon, the global rise of the persecution of conservative Christians and Jews by a red-green axis and false church. wvw.tv.com/Ozarks for all the details. Joining me today is my friend Diana West, who is the author of a brand new book called The Red Thread, and you can get a copy on Amazon or at the Center for Security Policy. And their website, the short URL is securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org. The subtitle is A Search for the Ideological Drivers Inside the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. And what we've learned is that there appears to be a lady who has some sensitivity toward the former Soviet Union, Nellie Orr, who worked at GPS, according to what we're reading and learning today. Her husband, Bruce Orr, was one of the highest-ranking officials at the Justice Department. He supposedly was taking information from this dossier that was funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and created and funneled payments to Fusion GPS through this law firm, the Perkins Cole. And his wife worked at GPS, and then he takes some of this information from the report. He takes some from his wife, and then supposedly that information, which is now obviously very, very biased, very political. Nobody would take this seriously if they were, worth their weight in salt for understanding the law, and they use this tainted, corrupt information, biased information, actually what appears to be absolutely fabricated information, to justify an FBI surveillance on a presidential candidate by the name of Donald Trump, which is why he said he was being wiretapped, which we found out after he was president-elect. The head of the NSA went to him and told him, you're being tapped, you're being monitored. And, of course, the next day he immediately moved his campaign or his transition offices out of Trump Tower over to his New Jersey golf course. And I remember when that happened, and I thought to myself, is that because they're concerned about security? What is going on there? I remember the day that happened. I thought, well, somebody's told him we can't secure you very well here, or what the issue was. Turned out it was security, but it was the fact that the deep state had begun and had been monitoring him as a candidate and now as president-elect. Have I got all that right, Diana?
That's about right. It's a very complex story. But in some ways it's more simple than we think, and I think once you start trying to examine these motivations, what is driving these people to take these extreme measures that are completely un-American, you do start to get a better sense of why this is happening, what is driving it. And one of the questions you asked as we were breaking, is there a communist influence at the heart of this conspiracy? And I think that on all the research I've been doing, I think that it becomes very conclusive that there is this general, very anti-constitutional, very pro-collective, very pro-government, centralized government movement inside the anti-Trump conspiracy that definitely has communist and Marxist influences. And I think it gets to the heart of who Donald Trump is as well, to have triggered this kind of extreme reaction. Because, frankly, if anyone else had come into office on either the Democratic team or the Republican team, looking at the normal establishment figures, we would not be seeing this kind of crazy, outrageous behavior. And I think my feeling is, and this is something I discuss in the Red Thread, I feel like Donald Trump is really our most anti-communist president, perhaps ever, in terms of his very core beliefs in what our country is, how our sovereignty should be reestablished, how our destiny has to be essentially keyed off our interests first. I mean, these are the building blocks of the nation state. Everything we've seen since World War II in terms of our involvement in more of an international system has been to the detriment of the interests of our country as a nation state. Everything's been about the integration of our country into the world community, the global world order, these kinds of phrases we keep hearing that Donald Trump is essentially disrupting and blowing up, and his very presence is a threat to. I mean, this essentially is the beginning of the rage against him. And one of the things that I looked at, one of the people that I looked at very closely in the Red Thread, I don't know if you've come across it yet, is James Comey.
Oh, yes.
The former FBI director that Donald Trump fired, of course. James Comey began his adult life at William & Mary, where he studied, graduated in 1982, and in about 20 years later, when he was on the cusp of real power in Washington, he was about to become the number 2 man at the Justice Department under then Attorney General John Ashcroft. A ridiculous pairing when you learn who Comey really is. He gives this very giddy interview to New York Magazine at which he announces that when he was in college, he was a communist. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm not surmising that. He said this. He said this, and this becomes a very fascinating red thread. What could I find out about James Comey? Well, it turns out that William & Mary, very, very wonderfully, for research purposes, has put on college senior thesis online, accessible to the public. And it is a public state university that may have something to do with it, but it's a wonderful resource. And I found James Comey's senior honors thesis that he wrote on the Christian in politics. And he looked at Jerry Falwell, who was very influential and important at the time. This is 1982. And he looked at Reinhold Niebuhr, the Protestant theologian, whom Comey, to this day, to the very minute, credits as the leading influence in his outlook on justice, on
Can
life,
I just stop
on
you?
his career.
I want to stop you right there. Let me stop you right there for 1 minute, because maybe you should tell our listening audience a little bit about theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, because I don't know if you know who Tim Keller is, but Tim Keller is a very influential, quote, evangelical, in quote, pastor in America out of New York, planted all these churches throughout the country, now is stepped away from his church in order to plant churches, quote, churches all over the country. He openly states that he was influenced by the Frankfurt School, the cultural Marxist Frankfurt School. I deal with this in my book, Marxianity, in great detail. But Tim Keller runs with the Gospel Coalition, along with a bunch of other cultural Marxists. And this guy wrote a book called Generous Justice, which is really nothing more than calling the church to be involved in social justice. He promotes many people, including Reinhold Niebuhr. And so this is now, for our listening audience, their ears just perked up, because you have just now connected. Okay? This is what's maybe, again, because this is kind of our wheelhouse. You have just connected the deep state, the fifth column, Comey and these guys, to the what we call the evangelical deep state. And I don't know if you know that I have a book that came out in November called Marxianity, and the subtitle is How the Evangelical Deep State and Their Useful Idiots Are Merging Marxism and Christianity Through Social Justice, White Privilege, Cultural Marxism, Illegal Immigration, Interfaith Dialogue, and more. So you just connected the evangelical deep state that runs around promoting guys like Reinhold Niebuhr and James Comey, who's running around promoting him. So there's, again, that connection. And by the way, many of the never-Trumpers in the evangelical world come from the Gospel Coalition, founded by Tim Keller, who are openly stating on the churches, on the Gospel Coalition's website, urge your pastors to help the congregations to vote for Hillary Clinton. So it's crucial. It's crucial that our listening audience understands the battle we're fighting is between an evangelical deep state where the Marxists have penetrated religion, as they've tried to do, all the way back to the Federal Council of Churches, National Council of Churches, Walter Rauschenbusch, Harry the Red Ward, all those guys, and now the deep state inside our national intelligence community. They're all running off the same plan or reading the same people. They're just going to different power centers, whether it's media, education, or religion. They have different power centers they've targeted.
Yes, exactly. And yes, I will say, and I will confess, that I did not know much about Reinhold Niebuhr before I embarked on this project. What normally comes across in just sort of general reading is leading liberal Protestant theologian, and a lot of writers throw out around his name, it seems, to sound smart. I mean, I think it really is that shallow. What I learned when I started trying to figure Comey out, I started reading Reinhold Niebuhr, particularly the two books that James Comey, in 2018, told the New York Times during an interview. If you remember, he released his memoir, Higher Loyalty, back in 2018, and he was interviewed and asked what his favorite books were, and he mentioned two titles from Reinhold Niebuhr that I learned as I studied came from Reinhold Niebuhr's most really openly Marxist period between 1930 and 1940, when he was a member of the Socialist Party, very militant member, who actually lectured and called for the violent overthrow of this country, of the social order. I mean, this is how out there Reinhold Niebuhr was, and to think that a senior justice official, as Comey was, a former FBI director, as Comey was, actually anchored his worldview, and more specifically his view of justice, having gone into that particular business, is absolutely terrifying. But look what Comey did over his career. He was known, just as the shallow interpretation of Niebuhr didn't tell us very much, but Comey, too, was known as a Republican, straight arrow, someone who was kind of a plain vanilla person, very dedicated public servant. I think a Boy Scout is another phrase that was associated with him. So these people, they end up hiding behind their suits in a way, or hiding behind their the offices they hold. But when you actually start to drill down on Niebuhr, as you obviously have and know much more about it than I do, you find out that what he imbued his works with was something the very great student of this, J.B. Matthews, called Marxian ethics, or war ethics. and you come away from this, and you come away from the really overwritten kind of diction that he used, and you find the ends justify the means. You find this desire to overthrow the social order, this desire to control people, to redistribute the wealth in the name of this so-called justice. You find all of these themes in Niebuhr's works, and then when you read them as synthesized in Comey's senior honors thesis back in 1982, it's a long time ago, I understand that. But again, I think it's relevant given his lifelong affinity for Niebuhr. When he was on Twitter, as a disguise, he was not there openly on Twitter. Even as FBI director, his handle was Reinhold Niebuhr. I mean, this man obviously means a lot.
That is shocking. That is
James
shocking.
Comey.
That is
when
shocking.
you actually put that all together and you compare it to his take on Jerry Falwell, because he was comparing the two, it is chilling. It is a chilling thing to see someone who sees fit as a lawyer, as an FBI, the top cop in our country, who sees fit to decouple morality, specifically Christian morality, from the practice of politics and law and everything in society to accomplish this version of justice that has nothing to do with our constitutional order, has nothing to do with our rights as citizens, and certainly has nothing to do with morality, as we get from the Ten Commandments and our other sources. So it's a absolutely nefarious disguise that Comey was able to construct. And when you actually break it down, and I do at great length in the Red Thread, you start to understand how it is that he is absolutely behaves without law so frequently.
All right, hold right there. My guest is Diana West. We'll be back more. She's written a brand new book called The Red Thread.
Thank you to all of you that support our broadcast ministry of putting out free radio and television programs, whether it's through our free YouTube channel, our free Roku channel, our free website, or our free app. We are distributing biblical worldview radio and television. Now, how do we pay for all the expensive programming and bandwidth and other expenses? Because you partner with us with a tax-deductible contribution through the Worldview Weekend Foundation. To make a tax-deductible contribution right now, please go to wvwfoundation.com. That's wvwfoundation.com. You can also send a check to Worldview Weekend Foundation, P.O. Box 1690, Collierville, Tennessee 38027. That's P.O. Box 1690, Collierville, Tennessee 38027. You can also give by phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, 901-825-0652. However you give, whether by mail, online, or by phone. Thank you for your tax-deductible support that keeps us broadcasting free of charge biblical worldview radio and television.
Wow, this is absolutely amazing what she's uncovered, and that is, again, that James Comey is running around quoting and saying it's one of his favorite books, or two of his favorite books, by Marxist Reinhold Niebuhr. I mean, this is, again, this is who the evangelical deep state are following, as I deal with in my book, Marxianity, which you'll find at Marxianity.com. These are some of the people we find Tim Keller quoting. And, of course, he doesn't bother to tell you they're Marxist.
No.
And now we find out that James Comey's doing the same thing. Did you find any connection between these guys in the Frankfurt School?
Yes, this was actually quite exciting. What I try to do in the Red Thread is connect all of these present-day players into the past in the continuity of teachers or families. There's a generational continuity to the assault on our nation by Marxism. And when you look at James Comey writing the thesis that I described at William & Mary in 1982, his main thesis advisor was a man named James C. Livingston. James C. Livingston studied at Union Theological Seminary, and he was a student of Reinhold Niebuhr and, bonus, Paul Tillich. who had come from Nazi Germany as a refugee, and Reinhold Niebuhr actually helped him get a job at Union Theological Seminary, and Paul Tillich had been an associate of the Frankfurt School group. He's very closely associated with these Marxist teachings toward Christianity. So you can see a direct intellectual line of custody here from the Frankfurt School, Paul Tillich, Reinhold Niebuhr, to Livingston, to Comey. That's only really 1 degree of separation from Reinhold Niebuhr himself. And this is the man Comey credits as being the leading influence on his life.
And the evangelical deep state, as we've said again and again and documented in my book, Marxianity, is up to their eyeballs in praising and quoting and recommending the guys at the Frankfurt School, and certainly their critical theory, and so much more. What's very interesting on page 42 of your book, Diana, is that you also, again, swerve right into our lane when you talk about the World Council of Churches, because, again, in my book, Religious Trojan Horse, The Coming Religious Reich, Marxianity, we know that this group was started by Walter Rauschenbusch and Harry the Red Ward, Walter Rauschenbusch being a Fabian socialist, who said they would use religion to bring about world government. They're famous for having the George Bernard Shaw Fabian window of 1910 that has a wolf in sheep's clothing. And you quote on page 41 at the bottom, Reinhold Niebuhr would deplore such crimes as we are told, although even 15 years after writing these words, he would declare to the communist-penetrated World Council of Churches that communism would abandon force when its aims were achieved. So here he is going and speaking to the World Council of Churches, and this is, again, one of the front groups for communism. So, again, there's a strong connection between this religious communism of Reinhold Niebuhr and, of course, the fact that James Comey seems to be quite intrigued by using religion for communism. I mean, why else would he be reading and recommending this guy's works if he wasn't intrigued by religion and how religion could be used to promote communism?
Yes, exactly. And I think you have to also twin this with the fact that Donald Trump and his father, his whole family, they grew up in a very different lane of Christianity. The Trump family went to Marble Collegiate in Manhattan, presided over by the very famous minister, Norman Vincent Peale, who was anti-communist to his bone. He was outspoken against the New Deal and FDR and
let me just throw in
the Constitution.
Let me just throw in just a quick disclaimer here, because that is really interesting, because Norman Vincent Peale, of course, I, in this radio audience, we would totally disagree with him theologically, Norman Vincent Peale, who went on to influence people like Robert Schuller. So we would totally disagree with him theologically in some of his beliefs that start swerving into the positive thinking and self-actualization and more New Age concepts. But isn't that interesting? Okay, so we put that disclaimer out, and we've marked that one. But you're telling me Norman Vincent Peale was also known for being a staunch anti-communist.
Yes,
that I did not know.
And he also participated in the political world in the 1930s in opposing New Deal abuses of the Constitution, Supreme Court packing, for example, that FDR was trying to engage in, various other kinds of executive overreach. Wow. He was somebody who was very staunchly against the loss of liberty that so much of the government's concentration of powers coming out of the Depression was taking us toward. And the thing that's so interesting to me is that this is where the Trump family found itself, and also similarly, Donald Trump has talked about his father's affinity for Billy Graham. This becomes important because at that time, Niebuhr was absolutely vicious toward Norman Vincent Peale on this communist issue. And there was tremendous friction between the Niebuhrian theologians and people like Peale who were very anti-communist. And this was a very important subject, obviously, particularly in the middle of the 20th century when these men were probably at the height of their prominence. And it was an ugly fight. So you see this cleavage, and if Donald Trump is sort of in that world growing up, and his family, his father would go to the Crusades at Yankee Stadium, Donald Trump has talked about, that influence is in his life. He was very friendly with Norman Vincent Peale. I think Trump himself, the president, hosted Norman Vincent Peale's 90th birthday party at the Waldorf Astoria. He married Donald Trump, I think, in marriage number 1. So, there was a closeness with that church and that family that was absolutely on the other side, certainly politically speaking, from the Niebuhr world. And so if you see Comey as a follower of Niebuhr and Trump as a follower of Peale, certainly at a certain point in his life, they're going off in completely different directions politically, because both of these men had a real political footprint. So
where does his father stand as far as was his father known to have been involved in anti-communist groups, anti-communist organizations? Do we have any connection between
Fred Trump?
Fred Trump and maybe the John Birch Society, or do we see him working with Fred Schwartz and the Christian anti-communist organization that Fred Schwartz started that influenced, John Wayne and so many, Ronald Reagan and so many others? Do we find anywhere where his father, Trump's father, is running in those anti-communist circles?
I can't answer that. I have not found that. It seems that he really was very much a businessman. He did have this Donald has talked about, various aspects of his father's faith, but I have not found him as an activist politically, and I just can't answer that yet. It's a good question, though.
Okay. I'd love to also find out, and maybe some of our audience can put in some search engines and do some research, Fred Trump and Fred Schwartz, Fred Trump and the Birch Society, Fred Trump and Israel. I'd also be curious to see where his father stood on the nation-state of Israel.
Yes, I just don't know. I really haven't come up with anything on the father outside of this little.
I'm trying to figure out.
Detail. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out how much his father, influenced some of these issues with him. So this is very fascinating what you've brought up about Comey and Reinhold. All right, so let's keep moving here. Who else do we need to talk about? I mean, by the way, I notice on page 44 your headline here is an anti-FBI director of the Frankfurt School. Now, why did you title it that?
Oh, an FBI director of, the phrase of the old school, so I crossed out old and put Frankfurt. Well, because of that intellectual chain of custody from Tillich and Niebuhr to Livingston to Comey. I mean, I think that we often talk about, as conservatives, we talk about how terrible the Frankfurt School was in terms of bringing Marx into the culture and into our cultural education teaching, but we don't often talk about how it was weaponized. And I think we can see someone who's following in these teachings is actually the couple of generations down the line, the product of the Frankfurt School. I mean, certainly at a remove, but Comey, in his, as I discussed, is somebody who's very radical in that very school, and I think that was why I put that cute title up there. I think it's very fascinating. If you move over a little to Hillary Clinton, you will find that in her early Christian education, her church had a youth minister. I believe Donald Jones was his name. I'll look it up as we're speaking, but he was someone who was very influenced by Tillich and talking about how she learned that Christianity could only really be rejuvenated through a Marxist way through her youth minister, and he had her reading these kinds of things as well, the same as Comey, in addition to she would move on to Saul Alinsky. But we're looking at the same Marxist form and same Marxist inspiration coming into these people as young adults, and we can watch their politics take on, weaponize, execute these same kinds of policies, because all it is you were talking about Marx coming into different power centers or in religion or education or politics, but it's the same stuff. Well, we can watch it. We can watch how it works, and we see these political actors entering into our lives, whether it's James Comey or Hillary Clinton or Nellie Orr. I mean, these are the same kinds of people seeking power and seeking to distort our republic, because that is really what they're at war at. And I think when they see Donald Trump as this anti-communist traditional figure, or actually I would call him a counter-revolutionary figure, to be quite honest, they see him as the greatest threat to everything that they have managed to subvert and pervert with this same Marxism that has ever come down the pike. I mean, we have never had whether he realizes it or not. We have never had a champion like Donald Trump in terms of his innate anti-communism and his innate hostility to these teachings that take us toward a global government.
Wow. And I don't know if you know, you mentioned here that later exposed as a Soviet aide, let's see, talking about Lawrence Dungan, but you said much of the Institute, speaking of the Frankfurt School's 1930s legal work, was performed by Edward R. Murrow.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know this, but as a young man, Edward R. Murrow helped John Dewey bring the Frankfurt School to America.
Yes, I do. I mention that because the reason Duggan is mentioned, Stephen Duggan, was president of the group that brought hundreds of Frankfurt School and other refugees to the United States and planted them into American college campuses. This is how we see it really take shape. And Stephen Duggan was also who employed Edward R. Murrow, who was, as you say, helping move these people here, like Tillich, like Herbert Marcuse and others. Also the father of Lawrence Duggan, who was later exposed as a Soviet agent. He worked at the State Department. So the nexus of Marxist and also Soviet intelligence is always something to be looking for. We even see in the Frankfurt School, we do see a few prominent Soviet agents as well. This is something that goes hand in hand with the more or less ideological wing. There's always the threat that you might also be talking to an actual intelligence agent.
You actually, in your book here, have James Comey quoting Reinhold Niebuhr when it comes to the issue of justice. Comey says, quote, justice is distributive, says Niebuhr, and must be accomplished through power, with one eye on the standard of love and the other on the regulative principle of equality. He clearly believes the duty to establish this justice to lie with the government, end quote. So you actually have the former FBI director quoting a known Marxist. When I come back from the break, I want to ask you, are you familiar with the book The Authoritarian Personality? Because it was written by a few of the Frankfurt School guys, including Theodor Adorno, and I just did some TV shows on that. But The Authoritarian Personality really describes guys like Donald Trump. It describes your John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Ronald Reagan, the guys of that generation that were very traditional in their roles, their understanding of male and female complementary roles, their patriotism, their nationalism, their fight against communism. And, of course, it would make sense these guys at the Frankfurt School hate a guy like Donald Trump, which means Comey would.
Sabotage the Movie and Marxianity the book have been a huge success thanks in part to people like you that have spread the word. And to thank you for your support, we are putting together a special package price where you can get Sabotage the Movie and Marxianity the book at a great savings for just $39.99 for both. That's the 6-hour docu-movie Sabotage and the 336-page book Marxianity packaged together at a savings price of just $39.99. You can order now at sabotagethemovie.com. Order this special package price right now at sabotagethemovie.com. Now, you, of course, can buy Sabotage by itself. You can buy Marxianity by itself. But these two resources complement each other, so why not get both? Sabotage the Movie and Marxianity the book. Now a special package price, passing on savings to you, thanking you for all your support and getting out the word about Sabotage the Movie and Marxianity the book. Go right now, if you would, and purchase this special package price as a gift or for yourself at sabotagethemovie.com. That's sabotagethemovie.com.
All right, welcome back. Glad you're with us. Diana's agreed to be with us again tomorrow because we're just scratching the surface here. We got more to get through. This excellent book she's written called The Red Thread. The Red Thread. And if you got the book for no other reason other than to come to understand some of the things we've talked about in the influence of the cultural Marxists from the Frankfurt School and, Reinhold Niebuhr on James Comey, the former FBI director, getting this book would be worth that information alone. You can get it at Amazon, Amazon.com. It's called The Red Thread by Diana West. You can also get it at securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org. So before we move into a couple quotes by Comey you have, I just want to reiterate this book by some of the Frankfurt School staff, The Authoritarian Personality, that we spent quite a bit of time on television and radio the last few weeks talking about. even the liberal media has said that this book, The Authoritarian Personality of the Frankfurt School, predicted Donald Trump. And if you put that into search engines, you'll find liberal liberal journalists, columnists, and reporters with mainstream publications saying, hey, these guys at the Frankfurt School knew a guy like Donald Trump would eventually come along. And the whole concept of the authoritarian personality is to see whether or not you would fall for a fascist. Would you fall for a communist? Would you fall for a fascist? And of course, these guys coming out of Germany, they were communists. So the test is to see if you would fall for a fascist. Of course, the communists hated the fascists hated the communists, and that was the fight going on between the Antifa black wearing uniforms of the communists and the brown shirts of the fascist socialist movement of the Nazi Party of Hitler. And so these guys, being outright Marxist, i.e. communist, fled Germany, and when they got here, they wrote this book, The Authoritarian Personality, and it has the F test, and the F stands for, are you a fascist, or would you be prone to following a fascist? Which explains why all these guys are running around calling Donald Trump a Nazi and a fascist, and those who follow him are failing the authoritarian personality F scale test, and thus are indeed following a Nazi/fascist Donald Trump. That's what these guys wrote. Now, if Comey is up to his eyeballs in this, no wonder he hates Donald Trump so much. This is what he has been basting in and cooking in and marinating in for generations.
Absolutely. No, it's really true. And as you read his paper, and his paper is about justice, he is discussing and politics, and you get the idea that he understands Niebuhr has no right or no wrong. There are no moral absolutes. There's something Niebuhr calls love, which is really just a nice word for redistribution of the wealth. And this becomes quite clear the more you read it, and you see Comey's little wheels turning in terms of understanding government as the place to be, to use the power of government to bring about this, quote, love, which is essentially this distributive justice. And you get around the point of how these things can be wrong, because Comey starts to tell you that to be a Christian in politics is essentially to divorce yourself from morality. And he literally writes, thus it is the duty of a Christian in politics to have no specific Christian politics. This is quoting Niebuhr. And he goes on to conclude himself, this is Comey reinterpreting what Niebuhr is saying, the Christian in politics must be willing to transgress any purely Christian ethic. He must be willing to sin in the name of justice.
Wow. He must be willing to sin in the name of justice. He also states here that, this is quote, page 46 of your book, Niebuhr believes that the Christian must pursue justice, and that justice is achieved through power. The Christian must recognize this connection between power, coercion, and justice. End quote. You know what that reminds me of is Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche taught the will to power, master morality, slave morality. And of course, the Frankfurt School, they were influenced by four people. They were influenced by Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and George Hegel. So Nietzsche, being that he was one of the thought leaders of the Frankfurt School, who said there's the will to power, all there is power. It doesn't matter how you get it, the will to power. And he wrote a book called Beyond Good and Evil. We got to get beyond good and evil to just what is power. Well, that worldview of Nietzsche came through the Frankfurt School, which would have come right to James Comey.
Yes. It's thuggishness at its core. It's brutal, and it's dressed up in this fancy language that is just appalling. I mean, this is I've read through his paper several times, and one particular section many times at this point, and it's truly deeply offensive, especially when you think that this is somebody who didn't just have these ideas and go off and live and be well. This man entered politics, rose to the top of our Justice Department, where he was number 2 during the George W. Bush administration, and then ran the FBI. It's absolutely outrageous when you
Can you imagine, Diana, if he was in the FBI and Hillary was president, and his distorted view of what Christianity is, which is a distorted view, can you imagine what he would be allowing the FBI to do, and what the Justice Department under these characters would be doing to real conservatives, to true Christians? I mean, if this doesn't show the American people why elections matter, And all of these pastors that run around out there with their pietism telling you, that you shouldn't be involved in social activism, Christian activism, and I think there is a balance here, but they bemoan your being involved. This is a perfect example of why they're being fools, because these guys are now reaching a point where they can shut down churches, pull their nonprofits, shut down radio, prosecute people under hate speech crimes. The Marxists and the Islamists and their red-green axis, Comey already, we know, and Mueller gave high-ranking awards, the FBI Director's Awards, to top jihadis. We have pictures of it in my film, Sabotage the Movie. But does this not show you how a guy in this position with the Justice Department could absolutely put the screws to true Christians and conservatives? Because he would believe we're the problem, that we're pushing a distorted conservatism, or in this case, a distorted, perverted Christianity, which is his Marxianity, his Marxism. This shows how they can come after us in these high places and why they would come after us, because they are these are not just political people. Comey is showing he's on a religious crusade.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, there is quite a lot to that, but none of it's theoretical. This is what they were doing to us. Yes. This is what was going on. And this, again, once you start unlocking how these people think, you do start to, or at least I do, start to understand the machinations of this anti-Trump conspiracy, how outrageous it was that they were using the powerful surveillance state against domestic political opposition. This is terrifying, and it's not just Comey, it's not just Justice. It goes to the Obama administration and all around Washington, and this is what is still to be reckoned with. We're still at a point of discovery, and there's no mechanism at this point to apportion real justice, to see these people exposed and pay the penalty for this kind of assault on our election.
Let's pick it up tomorrow. Diana West has been my guest. I hope you get her book, Red Thread. Take care.
This has been Worldview Weekend Radio with Brannon Howse. CDs are available by calling 1-800-729-9829. Or to hear an MP3 file of this or earlier programs, go to worldviewweekend.com. Views expressed may or may not be those of Worldview Weekend, BCY America, or this station. This program is a public affairs presentation of worldviewweekend.com and is heard weekdays on BCY America.
Don't miss out on any of our live streaming broadcasts. Hello, I'm Brannon Howse, and with all the technology that we have now, we can stream live anytime there's breaking news. Not to mention, we have our Sunday night live streaming Situation Room briefing. Now, when you join our text alert system, you'll get a link sent to you by text to your iPhone, iPad, Android, and you'll be able to immediately come to that link and watch our live streaming program. Sometimes we may do a breaking news story and bring in an expert through Skype on something that's happening in the world. So it could be a breaking news story, or it could just be our regular Sunday night live streaming Situation Room briefing. Don't you want to get a text alert so you don't forget and can just tap that link on your iPhone, iPad, Android, and come right to our player and live stream that event? Well, all you have to do is text WVW to 88202. Just text WVW to 88202, and you'll be a part of our text alert system and won't miss out on breaking news, as well as special live streaming events and special links we send out for crucial radio shows, TV shows, and articles. Again, just text WVW to 88202.